do not seek attention. We pay attention. We are often judged by award committees. We question the fiction in science fiction. We are going places and virtual places. We are NYIT, and the future is ours.
Hello, and welcome to New York Institute of Technology. I am Dr. Lorraine Mangiello. I'm a registered dietitian, a certified diabetes educator, nutritionist, and professor of clinical nutrition and health science here at NYIT. I'm joined today in our occupational therapy lab with Dr. Mindy Haar. She is the Assistant Dean of the School of Health Professions. She's also a registered dietitian and nutritionist, and she has worked in a variety of inpatient and outpatient settings. She has also had her own private practice. Here at NYIT, Dr. Haar oversees the clinical nutrition program, which is our graduate program. She also oversees our health and wellness and our program in health science. Today, Mindy and I are going to be talking about new food labels and how they can help you make informed choices at the supermarket. We're also going to discuss why you may see some different things on the food labels, but not on all foods. During the discussion, we would love to hear from you. Please join our conversation by putting comments into the comments section. We'll respond to those later on. Also, feel free to like us and share this post with your friends. And also tell us where you're from and a little bit about yourselves. So let's get started with a little background. In 2016, the Food and Drug Administration finalized its much-needed makeover of the iconic food facts labels. I'm sure you're all familiar with them. They're on over 800,000 products in the supermarkets. When this was announced, former First Lady Michelle Obama said, "Very soon, you will no longer need a microscope, a calculator, or a degree in nutrition to figure out what you're feeding your children." And this, she said, was a phenomenal achievement. But it turns out that we're all going to have to wait a little bit longer for those new labels, longer than anyone expected. After sustained and persistent lobbying by the Food Manufacturers and Beverage Association, the FDA decided to delay the launching of the new labels until 2020, even longer for companies who have sales less than $10 million each year. No one understands this. The FDA stated that they needed to give manufacturers longer time to comply, that manufacturers needed more than 4 years to print labels. 4 years to print labels. Makes no sense to us, nor does it make sense to the numerous consumer groups, medical organizations, departments of health throughout the country. The bottom line is that we need this information now. More than 110 million Americans have at least one or more chronic diseases that are associated with poor diets. In fact, 4 of the leading causes of death in this country, heart disease, diabetes, some cancer, and stroke, are all associated with diet and can be reduced by reducing our waistlines. And that's what the new labels were designed to do. Give consumers the tools necessary to fight obesity. So Mindy, let's start.
Yes.
Okay. Give us a little background. Tell us why nutrition labels in general are so important.
Okay. The obvious answer is that knowing what's in the food you eat is going to help you make better choices. Some surveys have showed that up to 80% of people do actually look at the food labels. Of course, we both know, we're not naive in this, that just reading the label, being clear on what's in the food, that's not necessarily going to assure that you make the right choice, but having that information at least gives you a chance to do that. Looking back at the history of food labels, we see it wasn't until the early 90s that food companies were required to have labels. 1994, it went into legislation, and all the food labels that we're used to looking at now have basically been what was legislated more than 27 years
So
ago.
it hasn't been changed in 27 years.
Aside from little tweaks here and there, we may mention some of those, this is basically the same label from 1994. And so much has changed. We all know that certain chronic diseases that people are experiencing, the percentage of people who are overweight and obese has changed. We also know and we both know from so much of the nutrition research that has come out, what things need to be emphasized, what are people eating that they're eating enough of and don't need that extra special guidance on the food label, and what things they're missing. The picture of that is not exactly the same in 1994. So more than 10 years ago, all the people who were interested in helping people eat better started saying, wait, let's take a step back, let's revise the label. So since 2005, this talk has been happening to get new labels out.
So it's no surprise to the food companies that it was coming.
That's right. This has been going on since 2005. All this talk about revising, and again, to try to get in that very small space on the package, we're so limited, to get the information that is most helpful to the consumer.
Well, the underlying causes of all the chronic diseases that I mentioned previously and that you just talked about really is obesity.
Right.
And the bottom line is, if we want to prevent obesity, reverse the epidemic, people need to eat less. Absolutely. If they need to eat less, they need less calories.
That's right.
So they need to know how many calories are in the food. How do the new labels help consumers with calories?
Okay, so let's talk briefly about looking at the comparison of the old, I shouldn't say old, this is still what's in practice, because label has not been adopted yet by all companies. But this is the new label format, and this is the old label format. What jumps out at you right away is now front and center. You see calories and you see serving size. These are the most obvious in the new format. What had to be reduced in giving the space, in the current label, we have this very big chunk of space giving us a whole table on daily value. This whole table has been reduced to just one sentence explaining what the daily value is, which is the percent of daily value is how much a nutrient in one serving of the food contributes to your daily diet, assuming you're eating about 1,000 calories. So all of the percentages running down the right side are based on the daily value of what the average person needs. So those are the key changes in the format.
So somebody can make a comparison. They can see that if they're having a certain food or nutrient, what percent of their daily intake that's meeting.
Exactly. That's exactly what the daily value is. Now, aside from making it so prominent, serving size, what has changed tremendously with this new label that we hope to have on all products as soon as possible is realistic portion sizes. And I always think of ice cream, pints of ice cream, when I think about serving size. 1 pint of ice cream, the official, according to now, the labels now, is that a half a cup of ice cream is 1 serving, which means a pint of ice cream, you should have 4 people, divide that evenly, and all the calorie information is just for that quarter of the pint.
Even if we had 4 nutritionists together,
we
wouldn't even only have a cup of ice cream.
I agree. I certainly, and that's exactly why they took a step back and said, wait, let's look at what people are really eating. And aside from, so what happened with the ice cream, they said, no, most people would eat 3/4 of a cup or 2/3 of a cup, meaning in a pint of ice cream, it's more realistic, you're going to get 3 servings. Soda, have a cup of soda, the serving size was 8 ounces. How many people drink just that 8 ounces? So that has been increased to 12 ounces. So all of the new realistic serving sizes, some got larger with ice cream and soda. Some, they said, wait, we were saying 8 ounces of yogurt was a serving size, but more people, it's more likely someone would just eat 6 ounces. So some of the serving sizes did get smaller.
I think that's really one of the most important changes with the new format. I know from my experience as a nutrition counselor for many, many years, one of the most frustrating things that my patients face, they were trying to make changes, they were counting calories, and they wouldn't lose weight. And they were making errors in the calculation because when they looked at the labels, they just couldn't figure out how much they were eating. I brought a couple of things as an example of that. these are 4 cereal boxes here, and these all have the old label on them. These cereal boxes all look quite similar. But this box, a serving size is listed as a half a cup. This container, a serving size is listed as 2/3 of a cup. This one is 3/4 of a cup, and the last one here is a cup and a quarter. So if you're comparing these labels in the old format, it's impossible to really determine the different calorie contents, which ones are higher, which ones are lower. It's impossible. Under the new format, what you're saying is all of these would have the same serving size.
Right, if they're similar products,
which they are.
And I think what I also want to add, some of these cereals are cereals that we would all perceive as being healthier choices, which they are, but the serving size is likely less, certainly in those cases, more than what one expects. So it certainly is harder to compare.
And that brings up another good point, Mindy. Even though a food is healthy and provides wonderful nutrients and things we need, it still may be elevated in calories. And someone who's watching their waistline knows that they need to decrease a few pounds. All calories matter.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. You in the audience, if you have ever been fooled by unrealistic portion sizes, let us know. Share your experiences with us. I know that some of you have been tricked by this, and it's very frustrating. So let us know, and if these are some of the things you're experiencing, like us or share your post as well. So let's finish talking a little bit more about portion sizes. You mentioned ice cream before, and I see you brought a dual label, which is going to be another format.
Right.
And this is something that's more likely to be used on an ice cream container. So explain how this is going to work.
Okay. So under the new rules, if there's a product where a person there's a very good chance where you're going to finish the whole thing. I mean, how many times, even if you think of a bag of chips, and you say, okay, I finished the whole bag, but look at the nutrition facts, and then you happen to notice that it's 1.5 servings in the bag. I mean, how many people
I'm going to say the
eat
half a serving,
the bag
yes.
and leave like a little half serving in the bag? So if it's a product where the person is likely to finish the whole thing, the manufacturer now has to give per serving and per unit, per container. So the label, so what you will then see are a dual label, which will tell you if you have 1 serving of the product, but how many calories you will consume if you end up eating the whole thing. In the case of ice cream, if you have the 2/3 or 3/4 of a cup, fine, but if you eat the whole pint, you can reference exactly how many calories are in there. Same thing would be true for a bottle of soda. It's very common to see 20-ounce bottles, so there will be 8 ounces, but the 20-ounce bottle is now also considered a unit, a container, and the calorie count will be listed there as well.
Okay. I'm glad you mentioned soda, because this is the single biggest contributor of excess calories in the American diet, sugar-sweetened beverages. So soda, iced tea, Kool-Aid, products like that. And I know that everyone understands that sugar is not a healthy food. It's not a good choice. We also understand that it tastes good, and I'm not going to deny that I enjoy eating sweet foods.
Absolutely.
But most Americans eat way more sugar than they should, and it's associated with so many problems, not only tooth decay and type 2 diabetes and obesity, but we also now know that sugar is associated with cardiovascular disease and hypertension, gout, so many things. But just to show some of the confusion with products that have both the new label and the old label. These are 2 soda bottles, obviously. And if I will read this to you, may be hard to see. On the Pepsi bottle here, it says 150 calories. On the Coke bottle, it says 200 calories.
Right, and how could that be? That's so much smaller.
And you're looking at this, and it also implies that this is a better product, lower in calories. This is one of the biggest problems with the FDA's decisions not to mandate that everybody start the labels at the same time. Pepsi is going under the old labels, so their serving size is 12 ounces. That's why the calories are listed at 150. Pepsi has really taken a good step, and they are now actually using the new labels, even though they don't have to do it for 4 years. And it looks like they have more calories, but they're
they don't.
exactly
Exactly
the same. There are so many examples of that, even sometimes with healthier foods. Here's a can of iced tea. This is also using the older labels. And if you look at this, what you don't see here is that this product contains 143% of your daily sugar allowance.
Right.
Okay? You will not see that anywhere on this label because it's an older label.
That's right.
Even a fairly healthy product, or one that is perceived as healthy, this product has 44% of your daily sugar allowance. Almost half of the sugar you should get for the day. Because they have the old labels on it, you won't know that.
Right.
So explain to us the advantage of the new labels and how these products will be so much different.
Absolutely. Yeah, the change in how sugar is listed is a major, major improvement with the new labels. Up till now, there has been a line that just says sugars, and that line includes naturally occurring sugars like lactose, which we find in milk, fructose, which is in sugar, plus all the extra sucrose, table sugar, extra corn syrup that's added, was all lumped into one line that says sugars. In addition to those being combined, whereas we have those percentages for daily value, that if you have one serving, how does that fit in what you should have for the day? For sugar, that was blank. And a lot of that was due to the sugar lobby. Those who are manufacturing sugar were fighting having any specific list or having it listed any differently. With the new labels, this is going to be separated out. It will have total sugars, but it will also have one line that says added sugar. It will tell you exactly how much added sugar, corn syrup, honey, brown sugar, molasses is added to it. And in addition, will tell you the percentage. Now, in 2015, U.S. dietary guidelines came out telling us that no more than 10% of your calories in a day should come from sugar. If you're eating a 2,000 calorie diet, that's about 50 grams of sugar.
Which is about 12 teaspoons,
12
right?
teaspoons. So that sounds like a lot, but you can consume that very quickly. So the new labels have that so that a person can make an informed decision by knowing whether it's lactose, fructose, but then having the separate line,
So they'll actually see how much sugar is there.
Exactly, exactly.
And you brought up the sugar industry. Recently I read that when the FDA made their decision, they stated that the Sugar Association stated it was disappointed in the FDA decision. We are concerned that the ruling sets a dangerous precedent that is not grounded in science and could actually deter us from our shared goals of a healthy America. I like sugar.
Yeah.
I won't deny it.
I know.
But I don't think I share the same goals as the Sugar Association.
No.
Our goals in the School of Health Professions is to make people healthier.
Right.
The Sugar Association's goal is to sell more sugar.
Absolutely.
And those things are at odds. It's
Absolutely.
that simple. You can't condemn the food industry for that. That's their purpose.
Absolutely.
They want to be profitable. The only way to be profitable is to sell more food.
Absolutely.
The only way to sell more food is to get people to eat more. They make their food taste good, so you want to eat more of it.
Absolutely.
Now, keep in mind that when we're talking about new labels and it's listing sugar, that's not a rule or a law that people have to follow.
No.
It's simply information. Currently,
Exactly.
Americans consume about 22 teaspoons of sugar a day. Okay, 22 teaspoons. And if everyone watching us at home think that you're not getting close to 22 teaspoons of sugar each day, I challenge you to think about your diet, look at a few labels, and send in some comments. Tell us if you're really getting that 12 teaspoons a day that's recommended. It's challenging. It's extremely challenging. And keep in mind, when we are talking about sugar, we're talking, as Mindy said, about added sugar. So if you're enjoying a piece of fruit, yes, it has sugar, but that's a separate category. These are sugars that someone has added to the food before you're consuming it. So let's move on. Sugar and calories, portion size, I think these are really the keys in fighting obesity and the chronic diseases. But there are some also important changes in in the labels regarding some vitamins, minerals, and fiber. So why don't you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to start with the fiber, because fiber, nothing is changing on what is listed on the label. It will have carbohydrates and it will tell you fiber, so nothing is changing there. And we know that's critical. Americans get probably less than half of the amount of fiber they need. Fiber affects your gastrointestinal system, keeps everything running smoothly. We know it may have some role in preventing in cancer, in heart disease. There are many different types of fiber, so that's very valuable. That's not going to change. What is going to change is what food manufacturers can designate as fiber in figuring out how many grams of fiber are actually in the food. Naturally occurring fibers in fruits, in vegetables, in whole grains, in beans.
Foods that people have always eaten.
That people have always eaten. Those are the types of fiber that have all the physiological benefits that I just mentioned. But then there are other kinds of fiber that they're creating in labs that are putting into food. It's not that they're harmful. In some cases, if they want to take out some fat, they may put in some of these types of fiber. An example would be something called inulin. They are not caloric, but, and here's the caveat, they don't have the same physiological effects on the body that the naturally occurring fibers do. So what the recommendation is that those ingredients can be in foods, but they should not count in number of grams of fiber. So that's going to change. So the label will be the same, but what the manufacturers can put on will be different. Vitamins and minerals will be somewhat different. We know there's a whole alphabet soup of vitamins. There are many minerals that we must have every day. But being that we have such a small space on food labels, in the 90s, they chose the 4, what we call micronutrients, the 4 that it was felt Americans needed to pay special attention to. So at that time, it was vitamins A and C, and for the minerals, it was iron and calcium. And as we said in the beginning, we had to take a second look. Are vitamins A and C still vitamins that people may not be getting enough of? Are iron, calcium, minerals that still need attention? So the decision was keep iron and calcium, very integral nutrients. People still are not quite getting what they should. Instead of vitamins A and C, what is now listed is vitamin D. We need vitamin D. Is very important for bone health. A lot of people aren't getting enough. Aside from getting vitamin D from food, our bodies can convert sunlight into vitamin D, but using sunscreen sometimes does reduce the amount we have. So getting vitamin D is a challenge for some people. And in addition, the mineral potassium, which has a very positive effect on blood pressure, that also needed to be highlighted. So those are now the 4 vitamins and minerals that are featured. And in addition to giving us the daily value, we're also looking at the exact amount, which for certain people can be very important information.
Okay. I see we have a comment from Burley. I hope I'm saying that right. Burley K. Thanks so much for tuning in and listening to us. And she wants to know, what can consumers do to push the FDA to implement these rules? That is a great question. The FDA had a time where they opened the discussion for comments. And I have to say the comments were overwhelming from every public health organization that you can imagine, urging the FDA not to delay. They decided to delay anyway. At this point, I think it would be prudent to contact your local representatives. You can find a link on our website to consumer organizations that will help facilitate you getting in touch with your representatives, and just let your voices be heard. This is an important consumer issue. And if you're concerned about your health and the health of your children and your family and the nation, people have to stand up and talk about it.
Right. And Libby is asking, how can consumers realistically understand percentage daily values on labels and know how to act accordingly, which is a great question in light of what I was just talking about with the vitamins and minerals. So the percent daily value, again, if you consume 1 serving of this food, how does that match up into what the average person needs in the course of the day? If you drink 1 cup of milk, and the daily value, which has about 300 milligrams of calcium, and the daily, if we know the daily value is 1,200 milligrams, on the label, it will show that 25%, you have reached 25% of reaching your daily value by consuming 1 serving of that product.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and again, getting back to the soda, remember what daily values, we're looking at these in 2 ways.
right.
Some foods
Minimums and
we
maximums.
want a maximum, other foods we want a minimum. So with soda, we do not want to exceed the daily value. If you look at this label, and you'll see this on the new labels, it's very clear. It says that added sugar is 110% of the daily value. So this is 10% more than you should have.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you look at something for calcium or potassium, 110% of potassium would be a great thing because you're getting even more than the recommended
Right.
4,700 milligrams.
Right.
So for nutrients like sodium and sugar, we want to keep the daily value under 100%. For other nutrients, we want to meet the 100%.
Right.
So it's really not that complicated once you know what you're looking at.
Right, and yeah, Kay's asking a great question. So who determines the serving size cited on the label, the food company or the FDA? If we just left it to the food companies, we would have teeny tiny servings because that often, especially if it's a high sugar food, the serving size would stay smaller. But the FDA will have, the FDA is taking a role in regulating what the serving size is.
I'll give you a good example of that. I've been practicing nutrition for quite a long time. And one of the first soups, canned soups, to come out being a low sodium soup, they advertised on their label low sodium, and this is before there were portion size requirements set by the FDA. And the only way that they made their soup less in sodium was they decreased the portion size. So prior to that, their soup would be 1 can was 1 serving. They cut it to 1 can is 3 servings, and they put a low sodium label on it.
Right.
So yes, if you only ate 1/3 of this can, you're getting low sodium.
Right.
So we've actually come a long way. Things are better.
Right.
But the new format will improve things even more, and we probably still room for lots of improvement.
Since we're talking about sodium, let's take Kim's question right now, because Kim is asking, whereas food labels, they're separating out what's the natural sugar and the added sugar. Kim is wondering if it would be helpful to separate out naturally occurring sodium and added sodium.
That
is
really
a really good
question. That's a good question. I never even thought of that,
Right.
but that's great. It wouldn't be as significant because less food is naturally high in sodium. See, with sugar, you have some wonderful foods like fruits and some vegetables,
And dairy
products that are naturally occurring sugars in them, and those foods are packaged with lots of nutrients.
Right.
With sodium, there are so few foods that are naturally high in salt that it's not going to make all that much difference. The other issue is that foods that are high in salt, it doesn't really matter if it's added salt or naturally occurring.
Exactly.
It's all going to have the same effect on your blood pressure. And I do want to take a minute to talk a little bit more about blood pressure. 1 in 3 Americans have hypertension. And it's really, and if you look at certain populations like African Americans, that's 50% of African Americans have hypertension. It's really alarming, and what's frightening to me, and this is just a new development, a new statistic, is 1 in 10 children are hypertensive. Children. I remember when this happened with diabetes.
Yeah.
You know, when I first started practicing, we didn't think children could get type 2 diabetes. Now we know that they can, and it happens all the time.
Right. That's why we call type 2 diabetes adult onset diabetes.
We didn't think children could have it. And now we're seeing the same thing with hypertension. Most people know that sodium is related to high blood pressure, and we need to watch out for sodium. Sodium has always been on labels. We should get about 2,300 milligrams per day or less. Actually, it would be great if we could get down to 1,500 milligrams, but that's a challenge.
Yes.
The other nutrient associated with sodium, with hypertension, as Mindy briefly mentioned, was potassium. Many people, I don't think, realize that potassium can actually mitigate some of the effects of a high salt diet. So if your diet is high in sodium, but you increase the potassium, that actually has a protective factor that can help lower blood pressure. And that's one of the reasons that we now see potassium on labels as well. Right. It is just so vital.
Absolutely.
So less sodium, more potassium. And, you know, we always get back to the same foods, fruits and vegetables.
Right, fruits and vegetables.
That's about the most boring thing nutritionists say, but we can't stop saying it because it really makes a difference.
The food, which are the foods that don't need nutrition labels.
And they don't have labels, correct.
That's right.
Only about 2% of Americans get enough potassium.
Which is also
so that's one of the daily values that you're going to hopefully be looking at and trying to reach that 100% mark, even more if you can, especially if you know if you're at risk for hypertension.
Right.
Okay, let's move on a little bit and talk about, you know, why do you, I think we already answered why the food industry is against this. They lose money.
Right, of
and
course.
It's in their best interest. They're there to sell you food.
Right.
But what do you see as some of the costs associated with delaying the onset of these labels?
Right, right. Well, look, first of all, we think of the dollar cost. And of course, we know food labels is not the only variable in our quest against reversing the obesity epidemic. We know there are so many things that need to be done, but food labels is just one of many possible strategies. But if we look at just the obesity epidemic and the chronic diseases that are associated with obesity, we talked about diabetes, we talked about heart disease, we briefly mentioned cancer. I just want to add, it's just so, even to those of us who've been in the nutrition field so long, a lot of the recent research on cancer, not all cancer is related to diet, but with those cancers that are related to diet, what's coming out in the conclusion of more and more studies is that obesity is a risk factor in cancer. So if we look at all of those chronic diseases and the dollar cost, we're talking $700 billion a year. If we look at the cost in terms of quality of life, people who are experiencing these these diseases, it certainly is going to impact their quality. And of course, we have to think about life expectancy. Through the whole 20th century, each generation had could expect to live longer than their parents did. For the first time in so many years, we're now in the 21st century and all these advances in medicine, and especially, and we talked about diabetes, and you as a diabetes educator see this, children being born now and their chances of getting these chronic diseases will actually lead to the children born today expecting to have shorter life expectancies than their parents. So these costs are staggering of what obesity is doing, and the hope is that food labels will help in some way, whatever that way is, but it definitely will help reverse that.
And you're talking about younger generations, and I don't think that they realize that the current generation, people born around the turn of the century, they are the first generation of Americans to be born when being overweight was the norm.
Yes.
They were born into a world where 70% of the people around them are overweight. Yeah. To them, that's the norm.
Right.
When we were born, it was the exception to be obese.
That's right.
Okay. They are growing up in a world, in an environment that encourages them to eat wherever they go.
Right.
There is food and cues to eat everywhere, advertising, and it's just so much more challenging.
Absolutely. And
food labels are one small tool, one part of this that can be useful.
Right. And just to add in, I mean, I remember reading, and I know we talked about this, you know, at some point, some researcher established that the food industry in America was producing enough food that each person could eat 3,800 calories a day. Now, if we think about that number,
and we only need about 2,000 a day.
We only need about 2,000.
So almost twice as much as we need.
So when I teach my class, I would always put that out to them and say, what does that translate? So basically it means that the food industry, as we said, wants you to eat more, and you will eat more when you have no idea what the calorie content is, when your perception of what a normal portion size should be is distorted. Now I'm looking at Melissa's question.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I'd like to answer
Melissa,
that one.
yeah, how closely should we follow serving sizes on food labels? So
yeah, and this is a really important question. You should not follow the serving sizes on food labels, and you may be surprised that I'm saying that, okay? The serving sizes on food labels is, in the past, what was set by the FDA, and as we already discussed, it was a small amount. In the future, they'll be a little bit more reflective of what people eat, but they are a guide to tell you how you can calculate how much is in the food.
exactly.
The FDA, the food company, does not know your individual needs, okay? How many calories you need is very individual. So the best place to start is knowing what you need and comparing that to what you're about to eat.
Right.
So if you're having some cereal for breakfast and that's the only thing you're eating for breakfast, for you, maybe 2 cups of the cereal would be great.
Absolutely.
But if you're having cereal for breakfast and you're also having a couple of slices of toast and an egg, well, then you probably should have less cereal. Okay, so remember, the serving sizes on the label is a guide, a tool to help you determine what your individual needs are.
Right.
So I think we're getting close to wrapping up. So there's a couple of things I'd just like to say in conclusion. Did you want to add anything?
No,
Mindy?
I was just going to come into
another question.
Libby. I'll come in on Libby's question, and
then
we'll
I'll wrap up. Sure.
and we may have more questions. Libby's question is, besides sugar, what other red flags should consumers be aware of in our food? And that happens, we also want to look at ingredients. And what I like about this question, it also fits into why the food labels should be come out, and all the companies should be forced to comply much sooner rather than later. When the food labels are out there and people understand and hopefully become more aware of their food, they in turn may choose not to buy products that seem to have a lot of calories or something else in their ingredient, and they may then the manufacturers want to keep manufacturing food, will respond to computer demand for more healthful foods. We've seen that in the past when trans fats were added to the label in 2006. The consumption of foods that had trans fats went down by 80%. And so the manufacturers responded by making food with fewer calories, without trans fat in them. So the hope is with new labels that will happen. I think, in reference to Libby's question, artificial colors and flavors have been looked at for years. There's a possibility that they can be problematic. And a lot of parents don't want to give their children foods with that. So if they see the labels, and this has resulted in manufacturers coming out with more foods that do not have artificial colors and flavors.
Okay, we'll take the last question from Ellie Zumbarakis. Hi, Ellie, and I think I know who you are.
Okay, so hi.
Okay, are there any changes on the way fat is listed on labels?
Yes, because we had so much to talk about, we didn't get to that. Up till now, there has been listed on the label not just grams of fat, but also calories from fat. That piece, calories from fat, is no longer going to be listed because research has shown the exact amount of fat we eat is not as important as the type of fat. So that is one change in regards to fat that will be listed.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us. In conclusion, there's a couple of things I want to wrap up. As we said, in 2014, the FDA decided that it was time to provide consumers the information they needed to fight chronic diseases with their knives and forks. But their decision to delay the deadline really is unfounded. It doesn't help the industry and it doesn't help consumers. They simply do not need the extra time, and the consumers don't have the extra time. By all accounts, we need these food labels and we need them now. They give us the tools to help us make healthy choices. The new labels list calories in font sizes so big that I don't need my reading glasses. They labels scream to me that calories matter. What I've been telling my patients for 35 years, that we need to start paying attention to the amount of calories that we eat. The new labels will tell us that a 20-ounce bottle of a sugar-sweetened beverage has 15 teaspoons of sugar, and perhaps we should drink some water and use the money we saved to buy some fresh fruit and vegetables. The new labels reflect serving sizes that reflect amounts that consumers actually eat, even if for some of us that means eating the whole container of ice creams. But what I want to make perfectly clear is labels are not laws. They are not rules that absolutely dictate what a person must eat, what they must drink. Labels are simply information, and it's about time that we know what we're eating. There is a public health emergency. There is an urgency to provide consumers information about their food. It is a time when 70% of our nation is either overweight or obese. 33% of our children are in that category. Clearly, food labels should not be delayed. They're one and a very important step in fighting and reversing the obesity epidemic. Thanks again for joining us. If you would like to add your voice to this discussion, a good way, as we mentioned earlier, is to reach out to your public officials, your elected representatives, and the FDA. Please visit us on the NYIT website. We have links there to help you learn more about important nutrition issues and how to, again, let your voice be heard. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We're here at the NYIT campus in Old Westbury. Come visit us sometime. We have a beautiful campus in our School of Health Professions.
Not many people think about how similar our nervous system is to an electric circuit. But as bioengineering students at NYIT, we can't help but see things this way. The secret bioelectric conversations between the stomach and last night's meal will soon be decrypted. We are NYIT, the Stomach Whisperers. And the future is ours.